Two people are making passionate love inside of an art studio. The woman, Emily, nervously walks down the street and into a building. She goes inside her luxury apartment and meets her husband, Stephen, a prosperous investor who is wedded to Emily, a woman who seems much younger than him. He is dressed up and looking nice. He has ditched his work meeting and has decided to go with her to an art gallery as they toast and drink. She goes up to get dressed and calls someone, but Stephen walks in on her and she hurriedly hangs up the phone. She makes up a lie about some security issue and goes to the closet to get dressed. He picks out a dress for her and she takes it. Emily feigns affection towards him, but her true feelings of dislike are evident when he's not looking. That night, they go to a museum opening in a limousine and some photographers take pictures of them as they step out of the car. They walk inside and start to socialize with their well-off friends. Some of Stephen's friends even make fun of him for being in debt. Emily then walks away from some people who are talking to her and carefully makes her way across the room while looking at David, a man she appears to be romantically involved with. They meet at an empty part of the museum and she's nervous because they didn't think Stephen would be showing up at the event, and David tells her to just relax. When Stephen notices them, Emily introduces David as an artist. They converse about David's artistry and Stephen shows interest in visiting David's exhibition space. The next day, Emily is at a United Nations meeting, serving as a translator for a diplomat. Simultaneously, Stephen is in his office discovering a financial crisis with his investments. After her meeting, Emily pays a visit to David at his art studio. As David prepares coffee, he charms Emily, leading to a romantic encounter. Their moment is disrupted when Stephen calls, expressing his desire to see David's artwork that day. This unexpected news leaves Emily and David looking concerned. Later in the day, David takes Stephen to his art studio. Stephen looks at his art pieces, but then he discloses that he's aware of David's secret relationship with Emily. David claims they are in love, which angers Stephen. He accuses David of deceiving Emily and reveals that he knows about David's past criminal activities, including defrauding a widow of her life savings twice. David insists that Emily loves him, but Stephen argues that if Emily were to marry him, her advisors would insist on a prenuptial agreement, leaving David with nothing. Stephen presents David with two options: confess the truth to Emily or accept $500,000 to end Emily's life. David threatens to expose Stephen's plan to Emily and the police, but Stephen counters by revealing his knowledge of David's previous victim. If David is convicted again, it would be his third offense, resulting in a 15-year prison sentence without parole. Stephen instructs David to visit his apartment the next day for the advance payment and then departs. Outside, Stephen retrieves a letter containing a photograph of Emily's affair, places it in an envelope addressed to himself, and deposits it in a mailbox. The following day, David visits Stephen's apartment while Emily is at her job. Stephen instructs him on how to enter their apartment undetected. He plans to use Emily's key and shows David the hiding spot. David questions why Stephen can't just lend him his own key, but Stephen explains that it would implicate him. Stephen plans to call the home phone, and when Emily picks up, that's when David should act. He should make it appear as if he's a burglar who accidentally kills Emily when discovered. Stephen then gives David an advance payment of $100,000. On the subsequent evening, Emily comes home and leaves her key on a tray. Stephen announces that he's heading out for his regular card game. Before he departs, he takes Emily's door key and hides it under a pipe. As he exits the gate, he spots David, who is wearing a mask. David sneaks in and uses the key to unlock the door. Meanwhile, Stephen is engaged in a card game with his friends. He later calls the electronic trading system in his office, and then uses a disposable phone to call their home number. Emily answers, but Stephen remains silent. That's when David attacks her. After a few minutes of struggle, Emily manages to grab a meat thermometer and stabs her attacker in the neck. David collapses dead, and Emily loses consciousness. Stephen can't hear anything on the phone, which suggests Emily must be dead, and he continues his card game. Stephen comes home, anticipating to find his wife dead, but is shocked to see her in tears. He panics upon hearing that emergency services are on their way. He tampers with the door to make it appear as if a burglar had broken into the house. He retrieves the key from David's jacket and returns it to Emily's keyring. When the police arrive, Stephen guides them to the deceased intruder. Detective Karaman informs Stephen that his footprints were discovered in the blood surrounding the body and questions his actions. Stephen explains that he was confirming the burglar's death. When an officer removes the burglar's mask, Stephen is taken aback to discover that it's not David, arousing the detective's suspicion. As the police are removing the body in a bag, David is observed watching from across the street, presuming that it's Emily in the bag. At the police station, Emily discusses the odd phone call she received before the assault, but Stephen stops them from asking more about it. The police later identify the intruder and discover that he is a habitual criminal. Their attorney states that it's evident Emily was acting in self-defense. The detective gets an emergency call from his wife, and even though he speaks Arabic, Emily understands the language and they speak to each other with it and form a peculiar bond of some kind. But soon, the lawyer dismisses the interrogation and gets the couple to leave the station. David is in his studio, feeling very upset as he paints his portrait of Emily with his heart full of sadness. The following day, Stephen takes his wife to her mother's house, revealing that Emily comes from a very affluent family. When Emily is alone in her room, she calls David to assure him that she's fine and will return as soon as possible. David is comforted by this. When Stephen enters the room, he finds the phone next to Emily. He presses the redial button and discovers that Emily had called David, so he arranges to meet him on a ferry. The following day they meet and discuss the recent events. David inquires about their backup plan. Stephen suggests that it would be suspicious if there were another attempt on her life, so they should wait. In Stephen's office, we learn about the escalating problems with his investments. Emily comes home and finds that her key doesn't work on the door. She requests a new key from the doorman and inquires if her husband has altered the locks, which the doorman denies. When Stefan arrives later, Emily informs him that she can no longer live with him. At her friend's apartment, Emily shares her doubts about Stephen with Raquel. Raquel argues that her husband couldn't possibly be plotting anything, because he's wealthy, and her money is safeguarded by a prenuptial agreement. However, Emily confesses that they didn't sign a prenup, despite Stephen's offer. Raquel points out that this means if Emily were to pass away, Stephen would inherit her $100 million trust fund. Emily seeks the ambassador's assistance to speak with the federal regulator. The ambassador informs Emily that her husband is facing a significant financial crisis and may soon encounter difficulties if he can't secure additional funds to service his loan. This information intensifies Emily's doubts about her husband's intentions. She shares her concerns with Detective Karaman, but the detective informs her that Stephen is no longer under suspicion because they trace the phone call he made that night to an electronic trading system. Karaman considers this a strong alibi, but one detail perplexes him. The burglar had wallets and other possessions, but he didn't have any keys, not even to his office apartment. Stefan gets a call from David and learns that David has a recording of Stefan giving him instructions on how to murder his wife. David then instructs him to meet at a diner immediately. When they meet later, David demands the remaining payment or he threatens to report him to the police. Stephen requests a few days to gather the money, but David only gives him a 4-hour deadline. If Stephen fails to deliver the cash within the stipulated time, David threatens to send the incriminating recording to Emily and the police. Emily looks up the burglar's record and discovers his address. She subsequently visits his apartment and uses the key from her keychain. She succeeds in unlocking the door, which implies that the key Stephen had taken and added to Emily's keyring is indeed the key to the burglar's apartment. Emily later questions her husband, asking why he placed the deceased man's key on her keychain. Stephen explains that it was to safeguard her from her lover. He presents her with a letter containing pictures of her affair, which appears to be a blackmail attempt by David. Stephen reveals that he has already paid David $100,000 to halt his malicious scheme against Emily, but David is demanding more money. Emily finds it hard to believe him, but then Stephen provides her with David's criminal record, which indicates that he has been defrauding lonely women of their money. Stephen asserts that he has done everything within his power to shield her from this criminal. Emily expresses regret for the ordeal her husband has endured. She inquires if this is the reason his business is in a crisis. Stephen is taken aback that Emily is aware of it, but he reassures her that he can always earn money and that she is his priority. Emily questions once more why he placed the burglar's key on her keychain. Stephen explains that he believed David was the one who assaulted her. Since their door wasn't forcibly opened, he assumed David had taken her key. To shield her from any implications, he retrieved the key and returned it to her keychain, and tampered with the door to make it appear as a typical burglary. Emily expresses her regret, and Stephen assures her that he has forgiven her, leading to their reconciliation. When she suggests they should inform the police, Stephen argues they can't because he manipulated evidence and settled David's blackmail. Emily inquires about their next course of action, and Stephen advises they should distance themselves from David. However, she mentions she left her ring in his loft. Stephen assures her he will retrieve it and departs with the money in hand. Stephen arrives at David's studio, but David isn't there. Instead, he finds a note with Emily's ring instructing him to meet at the park. David's phone rings, and when Stephen answers, he discovers that David has booked a train at the park. Stephen gives David the remaining $400,000, hands over the audio tape, and shakes his hand. Before parting, Stephen advises him to be cautious, causing David to worry that he might be followed. Later, David reaches his train cabin. When there's a knock, he readies his gun, but it's just the attendant, so he relaxes. Upon opening his bathroom, Stephen emerges and stabs him. Stephen takes David's gun and finds a receipt for a mailing service. He realizes that David has mailed a copy of the tape to Emily. After David succumbs to his injuries, Stephen rushes home. He locates the unopened mail containing the tape and quickly conceals it in his safe, along with the gun and money. Emily comes home and Stephen returns her ring and suggests they dine out. When he goes to shower, Emily spots the paper bag where Stephen had stashed the money, but it's empty, leaving her perplexed. Stephen finally gets out of the shower, and she's waiting for him. He is finishing up in front of the mirror when she suggests staying home instead of going out and she'll pick up the food. He agrees, but before she goes, she suggests calling the locksmith to get the locks changed because she still can't find her key. So he calmly says he'll call the locksmith in the morning and kisses her goodbye. As soon as she walks out, he goes over to the pipe to check, and Emily's key is right where he left it. He goes back inside to hide it, but she's there waiting for him. She's figured it all out now. He says David was unpredictable, but she's got him red-handed, so she's confident Stephen will go to prison for this. He throws the key at her and starts to slowly creep towards her, and the letter she has for proof is now gone, so she doesn't have the proof she thought she had. But she has cracked the safe, and she has the recording of the conversation. She takes the tape and heads for the door, but he stops her, but she hits him in the head, so he throws her to the ground and says that the only way she'll leave him is if she's dead. But out of nowhere, she shoots him with David's gun on the shoulder and tries to run away, but not before he grabs her leg, making her drop the gun. But as he pulls her towards him, she manages to get the gun and shoot him in the chest, finally putting an end to all of this mess. Later on, the police are at the apartment and listen to the recording of Stephen giving David instructions. She tells the detective that Stephen attacked her while she tried to run, and he agrees that she didn't have any other choice but to kill her husband. And with that, the movie ends. Subscribe for more movie recaps and let me know which films you want me to cover next. Check out my other videos, and also follow me on social media for more updates.